For many players, the Pokémon franchise has been on a downslope for the past couple years. High expectations were set back during Nintendo's E3 2017 presentation, with the confirmation of a core RPG Pokémon title on the Switch. Another series of games, Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, were released the following year. The implementation of Pokémon Go mechanics, along with being the fourth visit to the Kanto region, left many people with disappointment. However, this was not the core RPG title referenced back in 2017. In February of 2019, a mini-direct aired which officially announced the next generation of games, Pokémon Sword and Shield. The development of these titles would eventually become the talk of the internet, and for all the wrong reasons. The way Game Freak dealt with criticism struck controversy between players, and at the time of its release, left the fanbase divided. While I personally enjoyed my time with the game, it's no surprise that this generation falls short when compared to some of the best in the series, like Black White and Heart Gold Soul Silver. While the game went on to sell extremely well, many are concerned for the franchise's future and whether the issues with Sword and Shield will be addressed in upcoming titles. But even with all of the controversy surrounding Game Freak, there's one series that has managed to stick out from the rest. One that is, surprisingly, still running strong. And while it's under the Pokémon franchise, it's not even developed by the people of Game Freak. PokéMoN Mystery Dungeon is a video game series spin-off from the main Pokémon series. It began all the way back in 2006 with the releases of Blue and Red Rescue Team, and to this day is still developed by Chunsoft, now known as Spike Chunsoft. Across all installments, the series has sold around 13 to 15 million copies. Sounds good, until you realize both the Rescue and Explorer series sold 5 million copies each. The sales of the following titles, Gates to Infinity and Super Mystery Dungeon combined, only make up around 3 million units. And to put how small this number is into perspective, it's said that the mainline games have managed to sell a grand total of 240 million copies. With this in mind, it's impressive that a spin-off series such as this is still standing. It's not too surprising, as the repetitive dungeon crawling of these games make it cater to a niche audience. What was surprising was the announcement of Rescue Team DX, a remake of the Red and Blue Rescue Team games in Nintendo's Pokémon Direct, with a stunning art style that blends the 3D models with a world which feels like it's painted on a canvas. The initial trailer for the game was very promising, and as a fan of the Mystery Dungeon series, I couldn't be happier. But while watching this footage, the thoughts going on in my head weren't, "I can't wait to play this." It made me believe that there was a possibility of another game being remade. One I consider to be in my top 5 video games of all time. Another title within the spin-off series. And no, it wasn't Gates to Infinity. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky is an enhanced version of Time and Darkness released on the Nintendo DS back in 2009. It is, without a doubt, one of my favorite games of all time, to the point where I'd put it in my top 3. This version had both the incredible story of Time and Darkness while adding a ton of new content. The special episodes in particular stood out as they helped expand on the game's side characters as well as fill in some of the gaps in the story. Pokémon Explorers of Sky is a great example of what an enhancement should be. It keeps the best parts while adding enough content to feel fresh. Despite what some critics say, Explorers of Sky is one game that I consider to be a masterpiece. With phenomenal writing and pacing, tons of memorable characters, and repetitive gameplay that doesn't feel so repetitive. The dungeon crawling blends very well with bits of story that you get along the way, and I can't praise this game's pacing enough. It's ironic that one of the best games in the franchise happens to be a spin-off of said franchise. And that's why I didn't want Explorers of Sky to be remade. I feel that one of the biggest factors in whether a game should be remade or not is how has it aged. Link's Awakening is a great example, as when you look at the original, it's clear that it hasn't aged the best. Of course, this isn't implying that any remake means its source material aged badly, but one of the points of remaking a game is to modernize it, whether it be updated graphics or better gameplay. This is why I didn't want Explorers of Sky to get a remake. Almost everything about the game feels flawless. If we are to remake this title, what would be fixed? The story? No, that's already outstanding. Music? Have you ever listened to the game's soundtrack? Graphics. See, that's where my issue lies. One of the last Pokemon games to use sprite designs was Black and White. This was also Game Freak's era of animated sprites. No longer did battles consist of static images that rarely moved. I adored this style, as the animations combined with clean sprites made fights more immersive. Unfortunately, this era was short-lived, as the release of the 3DS would give us the first mainline Pokemon title in 3D, those games being X and Y. While I much preferred the style of Black and White, I understand that for a series like this to progress, it would have to eventually be forced to switch to 3D models. It's something that I've gotten used to and now enjoy. But this also applied to another series, Mystery Dungeon. The game after the Explorer series was Gates to Infinity, and while I have tons of problems with the game, one that has stayed throughout the series is the use of 3D models instead of sprites. I know it's a matter of opinion, but I really don't like it. It added to the charm of the first couple games within the series, so in a way it feels like we're losing a part of what made the game special. If Explorers of Sky was remade, in a way it would feel like a downgrade. It's just like that old saying, don't fix something that isn't broken. Explorers of Sky is anything but broken. Plus, it's one of a few games that has aged extremely well. If someone was interested in playing a hypothetical remake, I would just tell them to play the original. And this is why I initially was against the idea of an Explorers of Sky remake. Keyword, initially. You see, Rescue Team DX does something to both fix my biggest problems and keep the game feeling modern, and it has to do with its unique art style. It's as if they took the illustrations from the series menu screens and used that for the whole game. And you know what? It works. It's an absolute delight to look at, and feels like its world and characters are painted on one giant canvas. It's still using the 3D models, but has the charm of the sprite design used in the original and Explorers. That's why the trailer for Rescue Team DX got me excited. Not because Red and Blue were getting a remake, because there's a good chance it will happen with Explorers, and I need it.
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
Now, despite what I've said, this doesn't mean that I have no more concerns for a potential remake on the Switch. Remakes are often criticized for multiple reasons. If it's the exact same with minimal new content, it can feel quite pricey, as these games are often sold at full price. Problem number 2, sometimes the developers change parts of it which have the opposite effect. Instead of enhancing the experience, it takes some of the enjoyment away. And the last problem, one that Game Freak is infamous for, making the game way easier than its original. Luckily, I have played Rescue Team a couple of times prior to DX. To better understand how a remake of Sky would be, we can just look at this title. My knowledge about this game isn't nearly as much as Explorers, but I did notice many differences between the games. For the most part, Rescue Team DX is a true remake. It consists of the same story, along with its post-game. I can't go into much detail, but know that it does resolve some of the plot. The remake includes all Pokemon from the original, including any evolution or baby forms that were introduced in later games. So, Sylveon for example. When it comes to gameplay, there are a ton of smaller differences. Some good, others that are meh. Despite being a remake, it takes some great things from future titles and adds them to this game. For example, in Explorers, you could find treasure chests and get them appraised for useful gear. This wasn't in Rescue Team, but in DX these chests are found within dungeons and their contents are opened after leaving. Players can temporarily recruit Pokemon and will only stay on the team if you have their friend area. I loved this feature as it let you temporarily grow a team even if you didn't have that Pokemon's friend area. And after the adventure, ones that don't join will give you some money. Ranking up in the original didn't do much for your team, but in DX it works similar to Explorers. It can increase your camp capacity, number of jobs, pre-saved teams, and items in your bag. Blue and Red Rescue Team had a limit of 20, which could never be upgraded. The ability to accept more jobs is especially helpful given how many dungeons there are. It makes it easier to do multiple requests in a single area, and Pokemon that need rescuing will remain still in the dungeon. No more trying to talk to them only for them to keep moving away from you. Sometimes another Pokemon will notice that your health is low and heal you with a berry, but only if you allow it. This means you don't have to waste a turn healing when you could be attacking. Gone are the days where you're escorting a level 5 in a late game dungeon. Speaking of weak Pokemon, they won't waste your precious Reviver Seeds upon fainting, as you get to decide whether to revive them or not. These are some of many minor improvements to the game that make it less frustrating. Of course, there are issues. One added feature is an autopilot mode where the game essentially plays for you. While this is shunned by many, I just didn't use it. Plus, you can't do it when enemies are nearby, meaning that you still have to battle. Now all the items and enemies can be seen on each floor. I wasn't really a fan of this change, as this was the purpose of the X-ray specs. This item was rare but possible to obtain in dungeons. It felt very rewarding to find them on my own in Rescue Team and Explorers. It feels a bit too easy to start out with this. The item still does exist, as some dungeons don't let you see the enemies or items unless you have this accessory. The amount of Pokemon that can join you is 8, and I'll be honest, that's way too many. It's a complete mess trying to manage all of them, and I'm not sure why they changed this. The number before was only 4, and it worked very well. Plus, it can make some bosses way too easy. Something I didn't like was the removal of the IQ system. IQs were kind of like different abilities you could add onto your Pokemon, and you could raise the IQ by eating more gummies. Gummies still exist in Rescue Team DX, but now they can give party members something called rare qualities. It's sort of a replacement to the IQ system, though each Pokemon can only have one rare quality. While I do prefer IQs, this is a pretty good trade. The only problem is that some of these rare qualities can be overpowered. And last but not least, one that has been frequently talked about, friend areas. They still exist, but also don't. Red and Blue let you visit the Pokemon at the Rescue Team and recruit them, but in DX you're given this small menu with the sprites. It does remove some of the game's charm, though I might know why this was changed. In the original, your friend areas had just enough of capacity to have one of each Pokemon. Now, it depends on your rank. In other words, you can recruit a lot more Pokemon in the remake. And because you can have a camp capacity of 38 once you get Master Rank, they probably didn't know how to fit that many Pokemon in a single friend camp. Yes, it sucks, but it's understandable. And even then, I still want to see a remake of Explorers. But hold on, you sure had a lot of problems with the remake, plus there are many more issues you didn't address. Yes, that is true. But something that many fail to take into account is that not all pros or cons are weighed equally. While I have my issues with the X-ray specs, it's a minor complaint at best. I guess the biggest worry I have for the series is that a remake of Explorers of Sky would be too easy. Game Freak is infamous for doing this on games such as Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Even mainline games like XY and Sword Shield are much easier than old titles within the franchise. Some of the changes definitely made the dungeons easier, with the ability to hold more items and grind for EXP at the dojo. With that said, while it was more challenging to complete dungeons in Red and Blue, Rescue Team DX hasn't felt too easy. It did in the first part of the story, but like the original, I felt that difficulty spike. I never lost in a dungeon, or even boss fight, though I still had to manage my team and resources, and locations such as Sky Tower felt just as stressful. And while the dungeon crawling is a bit easier, the same can't be said about the bosses. Many of them felt more challenging than the original, especially ones in the post-game. Some even have new game mechanics such as utilizing the environment and primal evolution. There is one complaint about how the recruitment rate of bosses is now 100%, as before it was RNG based. But I much prefer going into a dungeon and fighting a very tough boss knowing that I will recruit it, in comparison to easily beating it but possibly having to redo the entire dungeon for another chance to recruit it. Rescue Team DX isn't on par with other titles such as Super Mario Odyssey or Breath of the Wild. But one thing it is a true remake of the original, with changes that both improve and impair the experience. It never felt like it was too easy. Even now I'm making my way through the post-game and the challenge is still there. It's a game with flaws, and yet I've enjoyed every second of it. Well, except for the multiple attack moves and range attacks like Earthquake. Seriously? You still haven't fixed those broken moves? It's not about whether Explorers of Sky deserves to be remade. It's about whether Chunsoft can make a game equal to or better than the original. While Game Freak has been under fire recently, they aren't the main developers for Mystery Dungeon. Given my experience with Rescue Team DX, I'm confident that a remake of Sky will be worth it. Just don't fix anything that isn't broken.